Somewhere in the Austrian Alps, 3,000 years ago, miners walked 200 meters underground into total darkness to dig for something most of us wouldn't bend down to pick up off the street. Not gold, not iron, salt. By the end of this video, you'll understand why entire empires rose, tax revolts erupted, and independence movements were born over a mineral you can buy today for less than $1 a pound. Before refrigeration, which is barely 100 years old, salt was the only reliable way to stop meat, fish, and dairy from rotting. No salt meant no way to survive winter on stored food, or feed an army on the move, or feed a city that had outgrown its fields. Salt wasn't seasoning, it was survival infrastructure, which is exactly why, above the town now called Hallstatt, people had been mining salt since roughly 5000 BCE. By the Bronze Age, it was organized industrial work. Archaeologists found a wooden staircase inside that mine dating to around 1344 BCE, the oldest staircase ever discovered in Europe. And because salt naturally preserves organic material, that mine did something almost no other archaeological site on Earth can do. It kept things, leather, textiles, tools, even human waste, well preserved enough that modern scientists extracted parasite DNA from it thousands of years later. The region grew so wealthy from this single resource that an entire era of European prehistory is simply called the Hallstatt culture, named after a mining town most people have never heard of.
Rome understood that same power. The Romans built the Via Salaria, the Salt Road, roughly 150 miles from salt flats near the Tiber inland to Rome. And this is where a word you use every payday was born. You've probably heard that Roman soldiers were literally paid in salt. That's actually a myth. What's true is stranger. Soldiers received a salarium, a cash allowance. And most historians trace the word to sol, salt, likely tied to salt's value and access, not literal grain of it handed out as wages. Either way, every time you say salary, you're speaking Latin for salt. Here's a story most people have never heard at all. 1,000 years later, on a marshy lagoon off Italy's northeast coast, a group of refugees had nothing. No farmland, no forests, no resources worth mentioning, except salt. Venice began producing it locally, then did something smarter, buying up salt from every other Adriatic producer and controlling who got to resell it. That monopoly profit subsidized everything else the city wanted. Cheap shipping, cheap grain during famines, trade voyages east that undercut every rival in spices. The Venetians had a phrase for it: il vero fondamento del nostro stato, the true foundation of our state.
Wait, a swamp full of refugees outcompeted some of the wealthiest trading cities in the Mediterranean for over 1,000 years because of salt? That's not an exaggeration. That's just Venice's actual economic history. Meanwhile, across the Sahara, salt was reshaping an entire continent differently. In the West African empires of Ghana and later Mali, salt was mined at brutal outposts like Taghaza, so harsh that according to the 14th century traveler Ibn Battuta, its buildings were literally built from slabs of rock salt because there was nothing else to build with. Yet Taghaza was, in his words, a place awash in Malian gold. Here's why. Salt was scarce where gold was abundant. Further south, gold was scarce where salt was abundant, in the Sahara. So caravans crossed the desert carrying massive salt slabs south and returned carrying gold north. And in some of these trading cities, by multiple historical accounts, salt really was exchanged close to pound for pound with gold dust, simply because both were essential and neither region had the other. Mali's ruler, Mansa Musa, grew so wealthy off this exchange that during his 1313 pilgrimage to Mecca, he reportedly gave away so much gold he temporarily crashed regional gold prices. An empire's fortune built on trading white crystal for yellow metal, slab for slab, across the largest desert on Earth.
On the other side of the world, China turned salt into something even more powerful than trade. It turned salt into state control. In 119 BCE, under Emperor Wu of Han, with the treasury drained by war against the Xiongnu, an advisor proposed something radical. Only the state could produce and sell salt. Private salt making became illegal overnight. One of the most basic necessities of daily life became a direct pipeline into the imperial treasury, at points accounting for as much as 80 to 90% of total state revenue. Not land taxes, not trade taxes, salt. It was controversial even then. A famous imperial debate in 81 BCE, recorded as the Discourses on Salt and Iron, argued the exact question we'd still recognize today. Should a government control something this essential to survival? China's answer lasted, in various forms, for roughly 2,000 years. France asked a version of the same question and answered it very different. The French monarchy's gabelle forced
households to buy a fixed minimum amount of salt every year at a crown-set price, whether they needed it or not, enforced unevenly, hitting poorer regions hardest. By the late 1700s, it had become one more grievance feeding a much larger fire. The gabelle didn't cause the French Revolution alone. Nothing that large has one cause, but historians consistently list it among the resentments that helped push France towards 1789. A tax on the most basic necessity of life, weaponized against the people who needed it most.
A century and a half later, on the other side of the world, a similar tax met a very different response. Under British colonial rule, Indians were legally barred from making their own salt, even along a coastline where it occurred naturally. In March 1930, Mahatma Gandhi began walking, not fighting, walking, 241 miles from an ashram to a coastal village called Dandi to do one deliberately simple thing: pick up a handful of natural salt from the beach and break the law. That single, almost absurdly simple act became one of the defining moments of India's independence movement. Salt, once again, wasn't just a seasoning, it was a symbol powerful enough to help crack an empire. So look at everything that just happened. A mountain in Austria, a swamp in Italy, a desert crossing gold for salt, pound for pound, a Chinese emperor turning it into an empire's treasury, a French tax that helped ignite a revolution, a barefoot walk to the sea that helped end colonial rule. Different centuries, different continents, different languages, all circling back to the same white mineral. We tend to think history runs on gold, oil, land. But for most of human civilization, the real currency running underneath all of it, quiet, unglamorous, sitting in a jar in your kitchen right now, was salt. You don't think twice about it today. For most of history, entire nations did.